The year was 1206. Deep in the grasslands of Mongolia, a man named Temujin stood before a council of tribal leaders. They had gathered for one purpose, to crown him ruler of all Mongols. From that moment forward, he would be known as Genghis Khan. The stakes? Nothing less than the survival of the Mongol people and the future of Asia itself. But then something unexpected happened. What started as a unified nation of nomadic horsemen exploded into something nobody could have predicted. Within just 21 years, by 1227, the empire had swallowed 13.5 million square kilometers. That's 5 times the size of the original territory. 5 times. In 2 decades. The conquests didn't stop there. Mongol armies rode in every direction, crushing everything in their path, east to the Sea of Japan, west to Eastern Europe, north into the frozen wastes of Siberia, south into India and Southeast Asia. They tore through the Iranian plateau like a wildfire. They reached the Levant and the Carpathian Mountains. By 1294, the empire stretched across 23.5 million square kilometers, connecting the Pacific Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea in one unbroken chain of Mongol rule. But what happened next shocked everyone. The very thing that made the empire strong would become its greatest weakness. Genghis Khan himself called his creation the Yeke Mongol Ulus, the Great Mongol Nation. In Turkish lands, they whispered a different name, Kur Ulug Ulus, the whole great nation. Every conquered people had their own way of saying it, but they all meant the same thing, total domination. For decades, the empire held together through sheer force and the iron will of Genghis Khan's descendants. They enforced what historians now call the Pax Mongolica, Mongol peace. Trade routes exploded across Eurasia. Technologies flowed from east to west. Ideas crossed continents. The Pacific spoke to the Mediterranean. Silk Road caravans moved under Mongol protection, and for the first time in history, you could travel from Korea to Hungary under one empire's rule. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Genghis Khan died in 1227, and immediately the question arose, who would inherit this massive empire? His sons circled like wolves. Ogedai became the second Khan, ruling until 1241. Then came Guyuk Khan in 1246, then Mongke Khan in 1251. Each succession brought whispers of betrayal. Each transition sparked new tensions. The grandchildren of Genghis Khan couldn't agree on anything. Should the royal line follow Ogedai's descendants, or should it pass through Tolui? What about Chaghatay's line, or Joki's heirs? The arguments turned deadly. Blood was spilled. Entire families were purged. The Toluids won after massacring the Ogedai and Chaghatayid factions, but even that didn't end the fighting. Then came 1259, and everything fell apart. Mongke Khan died, and 2 rival councils met simultaneously in different locations. Each one elected a different successor. On one side stood Arik Boka, on the other, his brother Kublai Khan. The empire that had conquered the world couldn't decide who would lead it. What happened next would split the Mongol Empire forever. Brother turned against brother in the Toluid Civil War, and the bloodshed lasted 4 brutal years. Kublai won, but his victory was hollow. He tried desperately to bring the Chaghatayid and Ogedai families back under his control. They refused. By the time Kublai Khan died in 1294, the unthinkable had happened. The empire had shattered into 4 separate khanates. The Golden Horde ruled the northwest. The Chagatai Khanate controlled Central Asia. The Ilkhanate dominated Iran. and Kublai's own Yuan dynasty sat in China, governing from Beijing. But then Kublai made one final move that would reshape everything. On December 18, 1271, he issued an imperial edict that stunned the Mongol world. He gave the empire a new name, Dai Yuan, the Great Yuan, a Chinese dynastic name. Some called it the Dai Un Yehe Mongol Ulus in full Mongol style, but everyone understood what it meant. The nomadic conquerors were becoming Chinese. The story of how this happened begins centuries earlier, in a place of frozen winds and endless grass. The late 10th century, Eastern Manchuria, a tribe nobody had ever heard of, began migrating west toward the Mongolian plateau. They settled near Lake Baikal, beneath a sacred mountain called Burkhan Khaldun. They called themselves the Mongols. For generations they remained small, insignificant. But then something changed in the 12th century. Mongol Khans started making alliances. They raided the powerful Chinese Jin dynasty. They grew bold. They grew dangerous. Then came disaster. In the 1160s, two Khans named Kutula and Ambagai were killed. The first Mongol confederation collapsed overnight. The tribe was broken, scattered, reduced to nothing. Other tribes seized their chance. The Naimans in the west grew powerful. The Karat in the center dominated the plateau. The Mongols fought just to survive against smaller enemies like the Merkit and the Tatars, who had allied with the Jin dynasty. But one man refused to accept this fate. His name was Yesugei, nephew of the dead Khan Kutula. He fought the Tatars with savage determination. He befriended Togrul, the mighty Khan of the Karait, and he took a wife named He-Elun, abducting her from her Merkit husband in a raid that would echo through history. Around 1162, He-Elun gave birth to a son. They named him Temujin. Nobody could have known this child would one day be called Genghis Khan. Then tragedy struck again. When Temujin was still a boy, Tatars poisoned his father, Yesugei. The boy watched his father die. His tribe immediately abandoned He-Elun and her children on the open steppe, leaving them to die. They faced hostile tribes, starvation, the brutal cold. The young Temujin did the unthinkable to survive. He killed his own older half-brother to secure his position as head of the family. What happened next would determine the fate of Asia. As Temujin grew into a man, he forged two critical alliances. First with Togrul, his father's old friend who led the powerful Karait. Second with a childhood companion named Jamuka, now a tribal leader himself. Together they fought to retrieve something precious that had been taken from Temujin. His newlywed wife Berta had been kidnapped. The Merkit raiders had taken her in revenge for He-Elun's abduction decades earlier. Temujin rode with fury in his heart. They found her. They brought her home. But she had been raped in captivity. And when she gave birth to a son named Joki, nobody knew for certain who the father was. The question would haunt the empire for generations. Berta gave Temujin 3 more sons, Chagatai, Ogadei, and Tolui. 5 daughters followed. But the victory over the Merkit had given Temujin something more valuable than family. Prestige, followers, power. His alliance with Jamuka began to crack. 2 ambitious men couldn't share the same sky. In 1197, Jamuka crushed Temujin in battle. Temujin fled south to China, defeated and desperate. But the Jin dynasty saw potential in this broken warrior. They sponsored his return to the steppe in 1196. Temujin exploded back into Mongolia like thunder. With Togrul at his side, he launched a devastating campaign against the Tatars in 1196. the same tribe that had poisoned his father. He destroyed them utterly. His prestige returned. For 5 years, Temujin and Togrul grew stronger with each passing season. In 1201, they faced their greatest test, a massive coalition led by Jamuka himself. The two former friends met on the battlefield. Temujin won. 1 year later, in 1202, he finished what he started. He eradicated the Tatars completely. Not defeated, not scattered, erased. The Mongols now stood as the supreme power in eastern Mongolia. But Temujin wasn't finished. In 1203, his partnership with Togrul shattered. The old Khan turned against him. Temujin faced annihilation, but somehow he survived. Then he did the impossible. He defeated Togrul and absorbed the Kharat into his growing army. The Naimans fell next. Then Jamuka was captured and executed. By 1206, every tribe on the Mongolian plateau had been conquered or destroyed. Temujin stood alone as the undisputed master of Mongolia. But he had done something far more important than winning battles. He had unified a people who had never been united before. In 1206, tribal leaders gathered for a Kurultai, a great assembly that would change history forever. A shaman named Teb Tengeri stepped forward and proclaimed Temujin as Khan of the great Mongol nation. The Yeke Mongol Ulus was born. Temujin accepted a new name that day, one that would become legend, Genghis Khan. Scholars still debate what it truly means, but everyone understood what it represented: absolute power. But Genghis Khan didn't just want to rule, he wanted to rebuild Mongol society from the ground up. What he did next, historian Timothy May called a social revolution. Genghis shattered the old tribal system completely. He took all the nomadic peoples and reorganized them into what May describes as a military-industrial complex based on the decimal system. He created 95 units called Minkid, Maizal containing exactly 1,000 warriors. These were subdivided into hundreds, then tens. Perfect military efficiency. But here's what shocked the old nobility. Genghis gave command of these units to his most loyal followers, many of whom came from low birth. Commoners, former slaves, men who had proven themselves in battle, not through bloodlines. His own family members? They received relatively few units, merit over blood, loyalty over lineage. Then came the laws. Genghis proclaimed a new legal code called the Ikzasag, or Yasa. It covered everything from daily life to political affairs. The rules were brutal and absolute. Selling women was forbidden. Theft meant death. Fighting among Mongols was punishable by execution. Even hunting animals during breeding season became illegal. The empire would be orderly, or it would crush those who disrupted that order. Genghis appointed his stepbrother Sheki Kutug as supreme judge, the Jarugachi. His job? Keep records of everything. Document every law, every decree, every judgment. The empire would have memory. But what happened next surprised everyone who thought they understood this conqueror. Genghis decreed religious freedom across his empire. Any faith, any god, any practice was protected under Mongol law. He supported trade, both domestic and international. The Silk Road would flourish under his watch. He exempted the poor from taxation. He exempted the clergy from taxation. A warrior Khan protecting priests and peasants. Then he did something even more unexpected. He encouraged literacy. He ordered a Uyghur scholar named Tata Tonga, who had once served the defeated Naiman Khan, to adapt the Uyghur script for the Mongol language. Genghis commanded Tata Tonga to teach his sons to read and write. The nomadic horsemen who had conquered through the sword would now conquer through the written word. The empire was organized, the laws were written, the army was ready. But Genghis Khan couldn't simply sit in Mongolia and admire what he'd built. Surrounding him were powers that had dominated Asia for centuries, and they weren't going to bow without a fight. To the south loomed the Jin dynasty, ruled by the Jurchens, who controlled northern China with an iron fist. Next to them sat the western Xia, governed by the Tanguts, who had grown wealthy from Silk Road trade. To the west stretched Tibet with its mountain fortresses, and beyond that, the Kara-Kitai Empire spread across Central Asia. Genghis looked at this ring of enemies and made his choice. War, not just raids, not just tribute, total conquest. The campaigns began, and they didn't stop. Mongol horsemen poured south into Jin territory. They smashed through Tangut defenses. They crossed mountains nobody thought could be crossed. They appeared where defenders thought they were safe, and they showed no mercy to those who resisted. But even as Genghis waged war across Asia, he was thinking about what came after. Before his death, he made a decision that would shape the empire's future and plant the seeds of its destruction. He divided his conquests among his sons and immediate family. The entire empire became joint property of the imperial family and the Mongol aristocracy. They would rule together as a class. It seemed wise at the time. Keep power in the family, share the wealth, prevent civil war. Nobody expected what came next. This decision would eventually tear the empire apart. But in those early years of conquest, Genghis showed another side of himself that confused his enemies. While his armies slaughtered those who resisted, he invited a Chinese Taoist master named Qiu Chuji to visit him in Afghanistan. A spiritual teacher traveling thousands of miles to meet a conqueror. Genghis listened to his wisdom. He gave all his subjects the right to worship as they pleased, even though he himself remained faithful to the old shamanistic beliefs of the steppe. A man who could burn cities to ash and protect monks in the same breath. A Khan who believed in spirits and demons, but welcomed priests of every faith into his court. The conquests continued. The empire grew, and with every new territory absorbed, the question became more urgent. How do you hold together an empire that spans from the Pacific to Persia? The answer would never come from Genghis Khan himself. On August 18, 1227, the great conqueror died. By that moment, his empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea, twice the size of Rome at its peak, twice the size of the Muslim Caliphate at its height, the largest contiguous landmass ever ruled by one man in human history. Before he died, Genghis made his final decision. His third son, the charismatic Ögedei, would be his heir, not the firstborn, not the strongest warrior, the one he believed could hold it all together. According to ancient Mongol tradition, they buried Genghis Khan in a secret location. To this day, no one has found his grave. Ögedei couldn't take power immediately. His younger brother Tolui served as regent, holding the empire together until the Kurultai of 1229 formally elected Ögedei as the new Great Khan. The moment he took control, Ögedei proved he was his father's son. He sent armies north into the Kipchak steppes. The Bashkirs fell. The Bulgars surrendered. Every nation that resisted was crushed. In the east, Mongol forces re-established dominance in Manchuria, obliterating the eastern Xia regime and drowning the water Tatars in their own blood. Then, in 1230, Ögedei did something no Khan had done since his father. He personally led the army south against the Jin dynasty of China. The empire that had tormented the Mongols for generations would finally pay. His general Subutai, a tactical genius, laid siege to Kaifeng, the Jin capital. In 1232, the walls fell. Emperor Wanyanshuchu fled for his life, but there was nowhere to run. In 1234, Mongol forces captured Kaizhou, the town where the emperor had taken refuge. The Jin dynasty collapsed completely. 3 Mongol armies commanded by Ögedei's sons Kochu and Khotan, along with the Tangut general Chugan, swept into southern China. With help from the Song dynasty, who saw an opportunity to eliminate their old enemies, the Mongols erased the Jin from existence. While the east burned, the west fell. Ögedei's general Chorma Khan hunted down Jalal al-Din Mangburni, the last Shah of the Khwarezmian Empire. He destroyed him. The small kingdoms of southern Persia saw what happened to those who resisted. They accepted Mongol rule without a fight, but not everyone bent so easily. In Korea, the Mongols launched campaign after campaign into Goryeo territory. King Gojong surrendered at first, but then he did something that shocked the Mongols. He revolted. His forces massacred the Mongol Darugachis, the overseers sent to govern Korean territory. Then Gojong moved his entire imperial court from Gyeseong to Ganghwa Island, where Mongol horses couldn't reach him. The message was clear. The empire could conquer, but it couldn't always hold. In 1235, Ögedei made a statement of permanence. He established Karakorum as the official capital of the Mongol Empire. No more moving camps, no more temporary settlements. He ordered the construction of a palace within massive walls. The nomads were building a city. They would rule from here until 1260, and from these walls they would command the conquest of the world. But even as Karakorum rose from the steppe, tensions were building within the imperial family. The seeds Genghis had planted by dividing the empire among his descendants were beginning to sprout. The empire was expanding in every direction, but the victories were becoming harder to hold. Ögedei launched an offensive against the Song dynasty in southern China. Mongol armies captured Xiangyang, seized control of the Yangtze River, and pushed into Sichuan province. For a moment, it looked like another complete conquest. Then the Song generals struck back. In 1239, they recaptured Xiangyang. The Mongols discovered that taking territory was one thing. Keeping it was something else entirely. Disaster followed. Ögedei's son, Kochu, died suddenly in Chinese territory. The cause remains mysterious to this day. The Mongol armies withdrew from southern China immediately, though Kochu's brother, Prince Khotan, refused to stop fighting. He turned his forces west and invaded Tibet instead. But the real storm was gathering in the west, where another of Genghis Khan's grandsons was writing his name in blood. Batu Khan swept across the Russian steppe like a plague. The Bulgars fell. The Alans were destroyed. The Kipchaks, Bashkirs, Mordvins, and Chuvash tribes were crushed one after another. By 1237, Mongol scouts were probing the borders of Ryazan, the first principality of Kievan Rus that would face the full fury of the horde. The siege lasted 3 days. 3 days of fierce fighting, of arrows blackening the sky, of walls trembling under bombardment. Then Ryazan fell. The Mongols didn't just conquer it. They massacred every living soul inside. They moved north. The army of the Grand Principality of Vladimir marched out to stop them at the Sit River. The Mongols annihilated them. In 1238, they captured Magas, the capital of Alania. By 1240, nearly all of Kievan Rus had been crushed under Mongol hooves. Only a few northern cities remained free, isolated and terrified. In Persia, Chormakhan's forces connected with Batu's invasion, creating one continuous front of conquest. The Georgian nobles surrendered. The Armenian nobles bent the knee. Europe itself was now within reach. But something poisonous was spreading through the Mongol leadership. Batu Khan, flush with victory, held a banquet in southern Kievan Rus to celebrate his conquests. Guyuk, Ogedei's eldest son, attended. So did Buri, the beloved grandson of Chagatai Khan. The feast should have been a moment of unity. Instead, it became a powder keg. Tensions between Batu and the two princes exploded. Words were exchanged. Insults flew. Old grudges surfaced. The rift became permanent. Guyuk and Buri despised Batu, but they couldn't touch him. Not while his uncle Ogedei still lived and ruled as Great Khan. Ogedei, oblivious or uncaring about the family drama, continued expanding the empire's borders. He sent armies into the Indian subcontinent. Mongol forces temporarily seized Uchch, Lahore, and Multan from the Delhi Sultanate. They even stationed an overseer in Kashmir. For a brief moment, India seemed ready to fall. But then the invasions failed. The climate was wrong. The terrain was hostile. The defenders were too entrenched. The Mongol armies, unstoppable in open steppe warfare, couldn't break India. They retreated. In Korea, Ogedei chose diplomacy over endless war. He agreed to end the conflict with Goryeo by making it a client state. Mongol princesses were sent to marry Korean princes. The Keshig, the elite imperial guard, was reinforced with Korean warriors. Through a combination of military force and political marriages, Korea was bound to the empire. The Mongol Empire had reached its greatest extent yet, from the Pacific to the edges of Europe, from Siberia to the borders of India. But the cracks in the foundation were spreading faster than the borders, and Ogedei's death was coming. The Mongol wave crashed into Europe with terrifying force. Poland fell under their advance. Hungary braced for impact. Polish cities burned as the western flank of Batu's army plundered everything in its path. Europe had never seen anything like it. But then something unexpected happened. The Europeans formed an alliance. Poles, Moravians, and the great Christian military orders, the Hospitallers, Teutonic Knights, and Templars, assembled their combined forces. They met the Mongols at Legnica. For the first time, the unstoppable horde was briefly halted. The victory didn't last. The Mongols regrouped and turned south toward Hungary. On April 11, 1241, at the banks of the Sajo River, the Hungarian army made its stand. Croatian allies fought beside them. The Knights Templar rode into battle in their white cloaks with red crosses. None of it mattered. The Mongols destroyed them completely. The river ran red with European blood. Vienna lay open. Northern Albania was within reach. All of Western Europe trembled, waiting for the final blow that would end Christendom forever. Then came the news that changed everything. Ogedei Khan had died in December 1241. The message reached Batu's camp like a thunderbolt. Mongol military tradition was absolute. All princes of Genghis Khan's bloodline had to attend the Kurultai to elect the next great Khan. Batu had a choice: continue the conquest of Europe, or honor tradition and return east. In 1242, he made his decision. The Western Mongol army withdrew from Central Europe completely. Europe exhaled. Churches rang their bells. It was a miracle. But modern researchers have discovered something troubling about this retreat. Ogedei's death wasn't the only reason. Batu never actually returned to Mongolia. If he was so concerned about the succession, why didn't he go back? A new Khan wasn't even elected until 1246, 4 years after the withdrawal. The truth was more complex. The climate of Europe was wrong for Mongol horses. The endless forests provided no grazing land. And unlike the open cities of Russia and China, Europe bristled with massive stone fortifications and castles that could withstand months of siege. The Mongols had the military power to continue, but the cost would have been devastating. Europe was saved not by its armies, but by its geography and architecture. Yet in the Mongol court, political storms were gathering that would make the European campaign look like a minor skirmish. The question of succession would tear the empire apart from within. Between 1241 and 1246, a woman ruled the Mongol Empire. Ogedei's widow Turagain seized power the moment her husband died, and she wasn't interested in maintaining the status quo. She launched a purge. Her husband's Khitan and Muslim officials were persecuted and removed from power. In their place, she elevated her own allies, people she could trust absolutely. But Turagain wasn't just settling scores. She built palaces and cathedrals on a scale that rivaled anything her husband had constructed. She supported religion and education across the empire. And most importantly, she worked tirelessly to secure support for her son Guyuk among the Mongol aristocracy. Most of them eventually backed her choice. Except for one critical holdout, Batu Khan, ruler of the Golden Horde in the west, refused to attend the Kurultai. His excuse? He claimed illness. He said the climate of Karakoram was too harsh for his health. Nobody believed him. The real reason was the bitter hatred between Batu and Guyuk that had festered since that disastrous victory banquet years earlier. The stalemate lasted over 4 years. The empire had no great Khan. Rival factions maneuvered for position. Unity crumbled with each passing season. Then Genghis Khan's youngest brother Temuga made his move. He threatened to seize the throne for himself. The crisis forced Guyuk to travel to Karakoram to secure his position before everything collapsed. Batu finally agreed to send his brothers and generals to the Kurultai in 1246, though he himself still refused to attend. By this time, Guyuk was a broken man. Illness ravaged his body. Alcohol had become his constant companion, but his military campaigns in Manchuria and Europe had given him the prestige he needed. At a ceremony attended by Mongols and foreign dignitaries from across the known world, vassal leaders, representatives from Rome, diplomats from every corner of the empire, Guyuk was formally elected Great Khan. His first act shocked everyone. He announced he would continue his father Ogedei's policies, not his mother, Turagain's. Then he turned on his mother's supporters with savage efficiency. Most were punished or executed. Only Governor Arghun, the elder, was spared. Guyuk replaced young Kara Hulegu as Khan of the Chagatai Khanate, with his favorite cousin, Yesu Monke, demonstrating his newly conferred powers to reshape the empire. He restored his father's old officials to their positions. Uyghur, Naiman, and Central Asian administrators filled the court. Han Chinese commanders who had helped Ogedei conquer northern China found themselves back in favor. Military operations resumed in Korea. Armies advanced into Song China from the south. Forces pushed into Iraq in the west. Guyuk ordered an empire-wide census to understand exactly what he ruled. He even tried to settle disputes in distant territories, dividing the Sultanate of Rum between İz ad-Din Kaykaus and Rukn ad-Din Kilij Arslan. Kaykaus rejected the decision outright, but not everyone accepted Guyuk's authority. The Hashashins, the feared assassin sect, whose Grand Master Hassan Jalaluddin had submitted to Genghis Khan himself back in 1221, decided to test the new Khan. They refused to submit to Guyuk. Then they did something unthinkable. They murdered Mongol generals in Persia. Guyuk's response was immediate and brutal. He appointed Elchigideh, the father of his best friend, as chief commander of all troops in Persia. The orders were clear: destroy the Nizari Ismaili strongholds and conquer the Abbasid Caliphate at the heart of the Islamic world. Iran and Iraq would fall, and the assassins would be exterminated. But Guyuk never saw his plans come to fruition. His body was failing faster than his ambitions could be realized, and his greatest enemy was preparing to strike. In 1248, Guyuk Khan did something that sent shockwaves through the empire. He raised a massive army and suddenly marched westward from Karakoram. Nobody knew why. Some chroniclers claimed he was heading to his personal estate at Emil to recover his failing health. Others whispered that he planned to join Elchigideh for a full-scale conquest of the Middle East. But the darkest rumors suggested something far more sinister. Guyuk might be marching to launch a surprise attack on his hated rival, Batu Khan, in Kievan Rus. The civil war everyone had feared was finally coming. One woman saw through the confusion. Sorghaghtani Beki, widow of Genghis Khan's son Tolui, was one of the most intelligent political operators in the empire. She suspected Guyuk's true intentions immediately. She sent a secret warning to her nephew Batu: "Guyuk is coming for you." At that exact moment, Batu himself was traveling eastward, perhaps to pay homage to the great Khan, perhaps with his own plans for confrontation. The two armies moved toward each other like thunderclouds about to collide. All of Asia held its breath. Then fate intervened. Guyuk, already sick and weakened by constant alcohol consumption, grew worse during the journey. His body couldn't withstand the strain of travel. At a place called Kumsengir in Xinjiang, Guyuk Khan died. Some said it was illness. Others whispered it was poison. The truth died with him. The empire was suddenly leaderless again. Guyuk's widow, Oghul Kaimish, stepped forward to claim control, just as Turagene had done before her. But Oghul Kaimish lacked her mother-in-law's political skills. Her young sons Koja and Naku challenged her authority. Other princes sensed weakness and began positioning themselves for power. In 1250, Uan Sehen of Batu Khan made a bold move. He called a Kurultai on his own territory, far from the Mongol heartland. It was a power play. The Ögedei family, descended from Ögedei Khan, refused to attend. So did the Chagatai family, descended from Chagatai. They knew what Batu was planning, and they wanted no part of it. The Kurultai offered the throne to Batu himself. He was the most powerful man in the empire, commanding the vast golden horde. But Batu did something unexpected. He refused. He claimed he had no interest in becoming great Khan. Instead, he nominated Mongke, a grandson of Genghis Khan, through his son Tolui's lineage. Mongke was currently leading Mongol armies in Rus, the northern Caucasus, and Hungary. He was a proven military commander. The pro-Tolui faction immediately supported Batu's choice, and Mongke was elected on the spot. But there was a massive problem. The Kurultai had limited attendance and was held in Batu's territory, not the traditional heartland. Its legitimacy was questionable at best. The Ogadide and Chagatai families would never accept this. Batu knew this. He sent Mongke east, protected by his brothers Berke and Tuktamur, and his son Sartak, to assemble a more formal Kurultai at Kodoe Aral, in the Mongol heartland. This time, it would be done properly. This time, the legitimacy would be unquestionable. Mongke's supporters sent invitation after invitation to Ogahul Kaimish and the major Ogadide and Chagatai princes. Come to the Kurultai, participate in the election, accept the will of the empire. Every single time they refused. The Ogadide and Chagatai princes made their position crystal clear. Only a descendant of Genghis Khan's son Ogadei could be Great Khan. They would never accept a Toluid as their ruler. Never. The empire stood on the edge of civil war, and this time there would be no diplomatic solution. On July 1st, 1251, Mongke's mother, Sor Gagtani, and their cousin Berk organized a second Kurultai. This time, the assembled masses proclaimed Mongke as Great Khan of the Mongol Empire. Power had officially transferred from the descendants of Ogadei to the descendants of Tolui. The political landscape of the empire had been completely rewritten. A few Ogadide and Chagatai princes accepted the decision. Mongke's cousin Khadan bent the knee. The deposed Khan Karahulegu acknowledged the new reality. But not everyone submitted peacefully. Shiraman, Ogadei's grandson and one of the legitimate heirs to the throne, refused to accept this. He began plotting Mongke's assassination. He gathered his own forces and moved them toward the emperor's nomadic palace. The plan was simple, an armed attack that would eliminate Mongke and restore the Ogadide line to power. But then Mongke's falconer noticed something wrong. He saw Shiraman's movements and immediately alerted the Great Khan. Mongke acted swiftly. He ordered a full investigation into the conspiracy, and what began as a single plot uncovered a web of treachery that stretched across the entire empire. Trials were held in every corner of Mongol territory. The purge was brutal and thorough. Estimates of the dead range from 77 to 300 members of the Mongol elite. Princes of Genghis Khan's royal bloodline were often shown mercy and exiled rather than executed. But everyone else faced the executioner's blade. Mongke didn't stop at executions. He confiscated all estates belonging to the Ogadide and Chagatai families. Their wealth, their lands, their power, everything was stripped away. He shared the western portion of the empire with his ally Batu Khan, cementing their alliance and rewarding Batu's support. After the bloodbath ended, Mongke issued a general amnesty for prisoners and captives, a gesture of reconciliation, a signal that the purge was over. But the message was unmistakable. The throne of the Great Khan now belonged to the Toluids, and it would remain with them. The old power structure was dead. The empire had been transformed through violence and political maneuvering. But Mongke wasn't finished. He had secured his throne, eliminated his enemies, and consolidated power. Now it was time to prove he deserved to rule the largest empire in history. Mongke Khan was everything his predecessors weren't. He was serious, disciplined, and strictly followed the laws established by his ancestors. Unlike Guyuk, alcohol never controlled him. He ruled with a clear mind and an iron will. But he also possessed something rare among conquerors: tolerance. He welcomed foreign religions and artistic styles into the heart of the empire. Under his rule, Karakoram transformed into something unprecedented. Quarters for foreign merchants sprang up alongside Buddhist monasteries. Mosques stood near Christian churches. Chinese, European, and Persian architecture decorated the capital in a fusion of styles the world had never seen. One creation became legendary. A massive silver tree stood in the city, designed with ingenious pipes that dispensed different drinks from its branches. At the top sat a triumphant angel. The masterpiece was crafted by Guillaume Boucher, a goldsmith from Paris who had been brought to Mongolia as a captive and became an artist for the Khan. Mongke surrounded himself with capable administrators. He had a strong Chinese contingent, but he relied heavily on Muslim and Mongol officials who understood the complexities of running a transcontinental empire. Then he launched a series of economic reforms that would stabilize government finances for years. His court slashed government spending. Nobles and troops were forbidden from abusing civilians or issuing unauthorized edicts. The old contribution system was abolished and replaced with a fixed poll tax collected by imperial agents who forwarded the money to military units that needed it. Tax rates on commoners were reduced to ease their burden. Mongke centralized all monetary affairs and reinforced security at the postal relay stations that kept the empire connected. In 1252, he ordered an empire-wide census. The project was massive, taking years to complete. The final count wasn't finished until 1258, when officials reached Novgorod in the far northwest. But Mongke wasn't just an administrator. He was consolidating power in ways his predecessors never imagined. He assigned his brother Hulagu to rule Persia. His brother Kublai received control of Mongol-held China. By placing family members he trusted in critical positions, Mongke ensured loyalty throughout the empire. In the south, the Song dynasty remained defiant. Mongke developed a strategy to crush them, a three-pronged attack from multiple directions simultaneously. He dispatched armies under Kublai to Yunnan. His uncle Iyaku received orders to subdue Korea and apply pressure on the Song from the northeast. The net was closing. In 1253, Kublai conquered the Dali kingdom in Yunnan. The Dali king, Duan Xingji, had defected to the Mongols and helped them conquer the rest of the region. It was a textbook example of Mongol strategy: turn local rulers against their own people. Meanwhile, Mongke's general Korodai stabilized control over Tibet by forcing the leading monasteries to submit. Subutai's son Uryankadai reduced the neighboring peoples of Yunnan to submission one by one. In 1258, he turned his forces south and invaded the kingdom of Dai Viet under the Tran dynasty in northern Vietnam. But then something unexpected happened. The Vietnamese fought back with fierce determination. Uryankadai's forces had to withdraw. It was a rare defeat, but Mongke didn't give up. The empire tried again in 1285. Defeat. They tried once more in 1287. Another defeat. Vietnam had accomplished what few kingdoms ever did. They had turned back the Mongol Empire 3 times. But while the South resisted, Mongke was preparing his greatest campaign yet. He would personally lead an army to finally crush the Song dynasty and complete the conquest of China. What happened next would change everything. After stabilizing the empire's finances and proving himself as an administrator, Mongke Khan turned his attention to what he did best: conquest. At Kurultas held in Karakoram in 1253 and 1258, he approved 2 massive new invasions. One would target the Middle East. The other would finish what generations of Mongols had started in South China. Mongke placed his brother Hulagu in complete charge of military and civil affairs in Persia. To ensure the campaign had overwhelming force, he ordered members of the Chagatai and Jochid branches of the family to contribute troops to Hulagu's army. This wasn't just another raid. This was total war. The first target was a problem that had plagued the Mongols for decades. The Nizari Ismailis, the feared assassin sect, had fortresses scattered throughout Persia. Muslims from Qazvin had denounced them as a menace, and Mongke decided to erase them from existence. In 1253, the Mongol Naiman commander Kitbuka began assaulting their strongholds, one by one. In 1256, Hulagu himself advanced, with the full army. The Ismaili Grand Master, Rukn al-Din Kursha, watched his fortresses fall like dominoes. By 1257, he surrendered. Hulagu had him executed immediately. Every Ismaili stronghold in Persia was systematically destroyed. Only one fortress, Gerdku, managed to hold out, resisting until 1271. But the assassins were just the opening act. Hulagu's real target lay further west, Baghdad, the jewel of the Islamic world. The city had wielded power for 500 years as the center of the Abbasid Caliphate. But internal divisions had weakened it, and Caliph al-Mustasim made a fatal miscalculation. He refused to submit to the Mongols. In 1258, Mongol forces surrounded Baghdad and laid siege. The city fell, and what happened next shocked the entire Islamic world. The Mongols subjected Baghdad to a merciless sack. Libraries burned, scholars were slaughtered. The Tigris River reportedly ran black with ink from destroyed books, then red with blood. Historians would later compare this catastrophe to the destruction of the Kaaba itself. The Abbasid Caliphate, which had ruled for centuries, was obliterated. With Baghdad destroyed, Hulagu had an open route to Syria. Nothing stood between him and complete domination of the Middle East. His army rolled westward, capturing small local states as they advanced. The Ayyubid Sultan al-Nasir Yusuf refused to appear before Hulagu personally, though ironically, he had accepted Mongol supremacy 2 decades earlier. His defiance wouldn't save him. As Hulagu pushed further west, something remarkable happened. Christian powers saw an opportunity. The Armenians from Cilicia submitted to Mongol authority. The Seljuks from Rum bent the knee. The Christian realms of Antioch and Tripoli joined the Mongol assault against their Muslim neighbors. Ancient enemies became temporary allies, united by the promise of Mongol protection and the chance for revenge. Some cities opened their gates without resistance, choosing survival over defiance. Others, like Myafarakin, decided to fight. The Mongols showed them no mercy. Populations were massacred down to the last child. The cities were systematically looted and burned. The message was clear: submit or be destroyed. The Mongol Empire stood at its absolute peak of power. Hulagu controlled Persia and was carving through Syria. Kublai was closing the net on the Song dynasty in China. Mongke himself was preparing to personally lead the final campaign against the Song. Victory seemed inevitable. The entire known world would soon bow to Mongol rule, but fate had other plans. While Hulagu carved through the Middle East, trouble was brewing in another corner of the empire. Berk, Batu's younger brother and successor who now ruled the Golden Horde in the northwest, launched punitive expeditions into Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, and Poland. His armies burned and pillaged, asserting Mongol dominance over Eastern Europe. But Berk was watching Hulagu's conquests with growing suspicion. The 2 branches of the family had always been allies, but now Batu's old fears were becoming Berk's reality. Hulagu's invasion of Western Asia was eliminating any rival power in the region. Soon Hulagu would dominate everything, and Berk's own influence would be crushed. The seeds of civil war were being planted. Yet the most critical campaign was happening in the south, where Mongol Khan himself had taken personal command of the army. He was determined to finish what generations of Mongols had started: the complete conquest of China. The Song dynasty would finally fall. The military operations went well at first. Mongol forces advanced steadily, capturing territory and crushing resistance. But something went terribly wrong. The campaign dragged on longer than planned. The weather turned hot, and instead of withdrawing north, as was customary, the armies remained in southern China. Then disease struck. Bloody epidemics swept through the Mongol camps. Soldiers who had survived countless battles fell to invisible enemies. The death toll mounted daily, and on August 11th, 1259, the unthinkable happened. Mongol Khan died. The great Khan who had stabilized the empire, reformed its economy, and launched the greatest invasions in Mongol history, was dead. Some said it was dysentery. Others whispered of cholera. A few claimed he died from wounds received in battle. The truth didn't matter. The result was the same. The empire was leaderless again. Across Asia, from the Pacific to the Mediterranean, Mongol commanders received the devastating news. According to tradition, all military operations had to cease immediately. Every army across the vast empire withdrew from their campaigns. Hulagu pulled back from Syria. Kublai halted his advance in China. Berke's forces paused their expeditions in Eastern Europe. They all had one destination: the Kurultai, that would decide who would be the next great Khan. The succession crisis that would follow would be unlike anything the empire had experienced before. This time, the dispute wouldn't just weaken the empire, it would shatter it forever. Hulagu received the news of Mongol's death while his army stood poised to conquer all of Syria. He faced an agonizing choice: continue the campaign and risk losing his claim to power, or withdraw and leave his conquests vulnerable. He chose power. Hulagu pulled back the bulk of his forces to Mugan, leaving only a small contingent under his trusted general Kitbuka to hold Syria. It was a catastrophic mistake. The moment the main Mongol army withdrew, the balance of power shifted. The Christian Crusaders and the Muslim Mamluks, who had been bitter enemies for decades, suddenly recognized a terrifying truth. The Mongols were the greater threat to both of them. In an almost unprecedented move, they entered into a passive truce with each other. The Mamluks saw their opportunity. In 1260, they advanced north from Egypt with their full military force. The Christians, who should have been their enemies, allowed the Mamluk army to camp and resupply near the Christian stronghold of Accra. It was a stunning act of cooperation, born from mutual fear. The Mamluks marched north of Galilee and met Kitbuka's vastly outnumbered forces at a place called Ain Jalut. The battle was brutal and decisive. Without Hulagu's main army to support him, Kitbuka fought bravely but was overwhelmed. The Mongols were defeated. Kitbuka was captured and executed on the battlefield. The news sent shockwaves through the Mongol Empire. For the first time in decades, a major Mongol army had been completely destroyed. The Battle of Ain Jalut marked the western limit of Mongol expansion in the Middle East. They would never advance beyond Syria again. The myth of Mongol invincibility had been shattered, but an even greater crisis was unfolding in the east. Kublai Khan, another of Mongol's brothers, heard about the great Khan's death while campaigning at the Huai River in China. He faced the same choice Hulagu had: return to Karakoram for the succession, or continue fighting. Kublai made the opposite decision. He didn't return to the capital. Instead, he pushed his army forward into the Wuchang area near the Yangtze River. He was gambling everything on completing the conquest of the Song dynasty before dealing with politics. His gamble backfired. Their younger brother Arikboke saw that both Hulagu and Kublai were thousands of miles away. He seized the moment. Using his position at the capital, Arikboke moved swiftly to consolidate power. He convened a Kurultai in Karakoram, and representatives from all branches of the imperial family proclaimed him Great Khan. When news reached Kublai, he was furious, but he didn't panic. He summoned his own rival Kurultai at Kaiping in northern China. Nearly all the senior princes and powerful Noyans in North China and Manchuria rallied to his banner, supporting his candidacy over Arikboke's claim. The empire now had two great Khans, each backed by different factions, each claiming legitimate authority. Brother faced brother. The Mongol Empire, which had conquered half the known world, was about to tear itself apart in civil war. The Toluid Civil War had begun, and it would decide the fate of the empire. Kublai's armies moved first, striking hard against forces still loyal to Mongol's previous administration. They crushed Arikboke's supporters with brutal efficiency and seized control of the entire civil administration in southern Mongolia. Kublai's military superiority was undeniable, but the Chagatai branch of the family posed another threat. Kublai tried to outmaneuver them politically. He sent Abishka, a Chagatai prince loyal to him, to take control of Chagatai's realm. It seemed like a clever move. Then Arikboke struck back. He captured Abishka and had him executed. In his place, Arikboke installed his own man, Algu, as Khan of the Chagatai Khanate. The message was clear. Arikboke wasn't finished. Kublai responded with economic warfare. He ordered a complete blockade of Mongolia, cutting off all food supplies to Arikboke's territory. Famine spread through the heartland. People starved. Karakoram, the ancient capital built by Ögedei, fell quickly to Kublai's forces. But in 1261, Arikboke rallied his remaining supporters and did the impossible. He retook Karakoram from Kublai. The civil war was far from over. While brothers fought in the east, another conflict erupted in the west. Hulagu remained loyal to Kublai, but his relationship with their cousin Berk, ruler of the Golden Horde, had deteriorated into open hatred. Berk had converted to Islam, and he watched with growing fury as Hulagu massacred Muslims across Persia and Iraq. The breaking point came in 1262. Joshid princes serving under Hulagu died under suspicious circumstances. War booty from the conquests was distributed unequally, with Hulagu keeping the lion's share, and the destruction of Baghdad still burned in Berk's mind. Between 1259 and 1260, Berk had even considered supporting a Georgian rebellion against Hulagu's rule. Berk made his move. He forged an alliance with the Egyptian Mamluks, the same force that had defeated the Mongols at Ain Jalut. He threw his support behind Arikboke's claim to be Great Khan. The Mongol Empire wasn't just splitting between Kublai and Arikboke. It was fracturing along multiple fault lines simultaneously. Then death began claiming the key players. On February 8, 1264, Hulagu died. Berk saw his chance and prepared to invade Hulagu's realm, but he died along the way before the invasion could begin. A few months later, Algu Khan of the Chagatai Khanate also died. Kublai moved quickly to fill the power vacuum. He named Hulagu's son Abaka as the new Ilkhan of Persia. He nominated Batu's grandson Munka Temur to lead the Golden Horde. By placing his own choices in these critical positions, Kublai was consolidating control over the fractured empire. Abaka, desperate to secure his new realm, sought foreign alliances. He even attempted to form a Franco-Mongol alliance against the Egyptian Mamluks. Christian Europe and the Mongol Ilkhanate working together against Islam. It seemed impossible, yet negotiations actually began. On August 21, 1264, the civil war finally ended. Arikboke, starved of resources and abandoned by key allies, surrendered to Kublai at Chengdu. He had fought for 4 years and lost everything. Kublai Khan was now the undisputed Great Khan, but his victory had come at an enormous cost. The empire his grandfather Genghis had built was no longer unified. The Golden Horde, the Chagatai Khanate, and the Ilkhanate now operated as independent powers, only nominally recognizing Kublai's authority. The Mongol Empire as a single entity was dead. What remained were 4 separate khanates, each pursuing its own interests, and Kublai still had one massive challenge ahead: conquering the Song dynasty and completing the subjugation of China. After crushing Arikboke's rebellion, Kublai turned his full attention south. The Song dynasty had resisted Mongol conquest for decades, but Kublai was determined to finish what his ancestors had started. In 1273, the fortress city of Xiangyang fell after a brutal 5-year siege. The gateway to southern China was open. In 1271, even before the final conquest, Kublai made a bold declaration. He renamed his regime the Yuan dynasty. No longer would he be simply a Mongol Khan ruling over Chinese territories. He would be the emperor of China itself. He moved his headquarters to Khanbalik, a city that would eventually become modern Beijing. The decision sparked outrage among traditional Mongols. They accused Kublai of abandoning his heritage, of becoming too Chinese, of betraying the nomadic ways of their ancestors. Kublai didn't care. He understood that to rule China, he needed to become Chinese in the eyes of his subjects. The final campaigns against the Song dynasty were methodical and devastating. City after city fell to Mongol armies. In 1276, the Song imperial family finally surrendered to the Yuan. For the first time in history, all of China was ruled by non-Chinese conquerors. The Mongols had achieved what no other foreign power had ever accomplished. Kublai used China's vast resources to build something unprecedented. He created an academy to promote learning. He established offices throughout the empire. Trade ports opened along the coast. Canals were dug to connect different regions. He sponsored arts and science on a scale never seen before. Mongol records claim that 20,166 public schools were created during his reign alone. Whether that number is accurate or propaganda doesn't matter. The intent was clear. Kublai was building an empire that would last for centuries. But conquest was addictive, and Kublai wasn't finished. He launched invasions of Burma and Sakhalin. Both campaigns were costly in lives and treasure, but they succeeded in establishing Mongol dominance. Then he turned his attention to Dai Viet in northern Vietnam and Champa in southern Vietnam. The Vietnamese crushed him. Mongol armies that had conquered from Korea to Persia were repeatedly defeated in the jungles and rivers of Vietnam. In 1288, at the Battle of Bac Dang, the Vietnamese navy annihilated a Mongol fleet, using tactics the Mongols had never encountered. Iron-tipped stakes were planted in the riverbed at low tide. When Mongol ships pursued the Vietnamese fleet at high tide, the Vietnamese retreated and waited. As the tide went out, the Mongol vessels were impaled on the hidden stakes and destroyed. Kublai secured nominal vassal status from Vietnam and Champa. saving face diplomatically, but everyone knew the truth. The Mongols had been decisively beaten. Meanwhile, in the western portions of the empire, Nogai and Konchi, Khan of the White Horde, maintained friendly relations with Kublai's Yuan dynasty and with the Ilkhanate in Persia. Political disagreements over who held supreme authority continued to simmer, but trade flourished. Silk Road caravans moved goods from one end of Eurasia to the other. The economic success of the Mongol Empire continued despite the political squabbling. Then Kublai conceived his most ambitious plan yet. In 1274, he ordered the invasion of Japan. A massive fleet carrying Mongol and Korean warriors crossed the sea. They landed near Hakata Bay and fought fierce battles along the coast. The Japanese samurai had never faced warfare like this. Mongol tactics, their use of explosives and coordinated cavalry attacks, were overwhelming. But then a typhoon struck. The storm destroyed much of the Mongol fleet. The surviving forces retreated to Korea. Kublai refused to accept defeat. In 1281, he launched a second invasion, this time with an even larger force. Again, the Mongols landed near Hakata Bay. Again, they pushed the Japanese defenders back. Victory seemed certain. Then the gods intervened, or so the Japanese believed. Another massive typhoon slammed into the coast, destroying the Mongol fleet and drowning thousands of warriors. The Japanese called these storms kamikaze, divine wind. The gods themselves had protected Japan from foreign conquest. Kublai never attempted a third invasion. Japan would remain unconquered, one of the few powers to successfully resist Mongol expansion. But even with these setbacks, Kublai Khan ruled over the largest empire the world had ever seen. From the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, from Siberia to Southeast Asia, the Mongol domain stretched farther than any empire before or since. Yet the empire's unity was an illusion. The four khanates operated independently. Civil wars had drained resources. Failed invasions had cost countless lives. And the question everyone whispered but few dared speak aloud was becoming impossible to ignore. How long could it last? In 1294, Kublai Khan died. The man who had conquered all of China, established the Yuan dynasty, and ruled the largest empire in history, was gone. His grandson, Temür Khan, succeeded him and continued Kublai's policies, but the empire he inherited was nothing like the one Genghis Khan had built. The Toluid Civil War had shattered unity. The Berke-Hulagu War had turned Mongol against Mongol. The Kaidu-Kublai War had drained resources and weakened central authority. The Great Khan's power over the entire Mongol Empire had become a fiction. What remained were four autonomous khanates operating as independent states: the Yuan dynasty in China, the Golden Horde in the northwest, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Ilkhanate in Persia. Only the Ilkhanate still showed loyalty to the Yuan court, and even that loyalty was tested by constant internal power struggles. Islamic factions within the southwestern empire were growing stronger, challenging Mongol authority from within. But then something unexpected happened. After Kaidu died, the Chagatai ruler Dua saw an opportunity for peace. He initiated a proposal and persuaded the Ogedids, who had been at war with the Yuan for decades, to finally submit to Temür Khan's authority. In 1304, representatives from all four khanates gathered and approved a peace treaty. They formally accepted Emperor Temür's supremacy. For the first time since Mongka's death 45 years earlier, the Mongol Empire had nominal unity again. But everyone understood the truth. This wasn't the empire of Genghis Khan or even Kublai Khan. Temür's supremacy existed on paper, built on diplomatic agreements rather than military dominance. Each of the four khanates continued to develop separately, maintain their own armies, collect their own taxes, and function as completely independent states. They simply agreed to recognize the Yuan emperor as first among equals. Yet something remarkable emerged from this fragile peace. Nearly a century of relentless conquest and devastating civil war gave way to relative stability. The Pax Mongolica, Mongol peace, settled over Eurasia. International trade exploded between Asia and Europe on a scale never before seen. Cultural exchanges flourished. Communication between the Yuan dynasty in China and the Ilkhanate in Persia encouraged merchants to travel the entire length of the Silk Road. Royal textile patterns from China appeared on Armenian decorations thousands of miles away. Trees and vegetables were transplanted across the empire, introducing new crops to distant lands. Technological innovations, gunpowder, printing, the compass, spread from Mongol territories westward into Europe, changing the course of Western civilization. Pope John XXI received a memorandum from the Eastern Church describing this new world order. The Khagan is one of the greatest monarchs and all lords of the state, including the king of Al-Malik, in the Chagatai Khanate, Emperor Abu Sa'id, and Uzbek Khan, are his subjects, paying their respects to His Holiness. But the memorandum told only part of the story. While the four khanates maintained diplomatic relations well into the 14th century, they did so as sovereign states pursuing their own interests. Never again would they pool their military resources for a cooperative campaign. Never again would Mongol armies unite to conquer new territories as one force. The empire had transformed from a unified military machine into a network of independent kingdoms connected by trade, diplomacy, and a shared heritage. It was still powerful, still influential, but the dream of one ruler commanding from the Pacific to the Mediterranean was finished. The fractures that had begun with the death of Genghis Khan and widened with each succession crisis had become permanent. The question now wasn't whether the empire would remain unified. The question was how long each individual khanate could survive before crumbling completely. Despite his ongoing conflicts with Kaidu and Dua, Yuan Emperor Temur wasn't finished expanding. Between 1297 and 1303, he launched a series of military operations against Thailand, eventually establishing a tributary relationship with the warlike Shan people. This marked the final southern expansion of the Mongols. They had reached their absolute limit. In 1295, something monumental happened in Persia. Ghazan took the throne of the Ilkhanate and formally converted to Islam. It was a turning point in Mongol history. For nearly a century, the Mongols had maintained their shamanistic beliefs and tolerated all religions. Now, Mongol Persia was becoming Islamic. The empire was transforming from within. But Ghazan understood politics. Despite his conversion, he strengthened ties with Timur Khan and the Yuan dynasty in the east. It was strategically necessary. The Golden Horde in Rus had long claimed nearby Georgia, and advertising the Great Khan's authority gave Ghazan legitimacy against those claims. Within 4 years, Ghazan began sending tribute to the Yuan court. He appealed to other Khans to recognize Timur Khan as their overlord. Cultural and scientific exchanges between the Ilkhanate and Yuan dynasty flourished under his watch. Ghazan's faith may have been Islamic, but he hadn't forgotten the old ways. He continued his ancestors' war against the Egyptian Mamluks, consulting with his Mongol advisors in their native tongue. In 1299, he crushed the Mamluk army at the Battle of Wadi al-Khazandar. Syria lay open before him, but his occupation lasted only briefly. Raiders from the Chagatai Khanate under Kaidu kept attacking, forcing Ghazan to pull back his forces. Kaidu was causing problems everywhere. Inside the Golden Horde, he sponsored his own candidate Kobaleg against Bayan, the Khan of the White Horde. Bayan fought back, requesting military assistance from both Temür Khan and the Ilkhanate. They agreed to organize a unified attack against Kaidu's forces. Temür attacked Kaidu a year later. In 1301, near the Zaukan River, the armies met in a bloody battle. Kaidu died during the fighting, and Duwa succeeded him. But Duwa faced an immediate challenge from Kaidu's son Chapar, who refused to accept the succession. With Temür's assistance, Duwa defeated the Ugadides completely. Tokta of the Golden Horde, sensing an opportunity for general peace, sent 20,000 men to reinforce the Yuan frontier. For a moment, unity seemed possible again. Then, in 1312, Tokta died. Ozbeg seized the throne of the Golden Horde, and everything changed. He launched a persecution of non-Muslim Mongols, forcing conversions throughout his territory. The Yuan's influence over the horde collapsed. Border clashes between Mongol states resumed. Ayur Barwada Buyantu Khan sent envoys to back Tokta's son against Ozbeg, but it was too late. The Golden Horde was now firmly Islamic and independent. In the Chagatai Khanate, chaos erupted. Esenbukafans took the throne in 1309 after crushing a sudden rebellion by Ogaday's descendants. He drove Chapar into exile. The Yuan and Ilkhanid armies responded by attacking the Chagatai Khanate together, trying to restore order. Ozbeg, recognizing the economic benefits and remembering the Genghisid legacy, reopened friendly relations with the Yuan. In 1326, he built mosques and elaborate bathhouses, strengthening ties with the Muslim world. By the second decade of the 14th century, the age of Mongol invasions was definitively over. In 1323, Abu Sa'id Khan of the Ilkhanate signed a peace treaty with Egypt. At his request, the Yuan court awarded his custodian Chupan the title of commander-in-chief of all Mongol Khanates. Chupan died in late 1327, and with him died any pretense of unified military command. Then, in 1328, civil war erupted in the Yuan dynasty itself. After Emperor Yesun Temür died, two rivals claimed the throne. Tug Temür seized power in Khanbalik, while Yesun Temür's son Ragibag declared himself emperor in Shangdu. The war of the two capitals had begun. Chinese against Chinese, Mongol against Mongol, all fighting for control of the dynasty. Tug Temür defeated Ragibag, but the victory was hollow. The Chagatai Khan Eljigadei supported Kusala, Tug Temür's elder brother, as the rightful Great Khan. Eljigadei invaded with a massive force. Tug Temür, facing certain defeat, abdicated. On August 30th, 1329, Kusala was formally elected Khan. But nothing was ever simple in Mongol politics. A Kipchak commander loyal to Tug Temür poisoned Kusala. Tug Temür returned to power over his brother's corpse. Tug Temür was different from his predecessors. He knew Chinese language and history. He was a poet, a calligrapher, a painter. He understood that to be accepted as sovereign of the Mongol world, he needed more than military power. He sent Genghisid princes and descendants of famous Mongol generals to the Chagatai Khanate, to Ilkhan Abu Sa'id, and to Ozbeg. He offered gifts, honors, titles. In response, they all agreed to send tribute each year. Tug Temür even gave lavish presents and an imperial seal to Eljigadei to soothe his anger over backing the wrong candidate. It was pure theater, diplomatic performance designed to maintain the illusion of unity. but everyone knew the truth. The Mongol Empire existed only as a collection of independent kingdoms that happened to share a common ancestor and memories of past glory. The bonds holding them together were cultural and economic, not political or military. In 1335, Ilkhan Abu Sa'id Bahadur died, and everything collapsed. Mongol rule in Persia faltered immediately. Political anarchy consumed the region. A year later, an Oirat governor assassinated Abu Sa'id's successor. The Ilkhanate shattered into competing factions, the Suldus, the Jalayir, Kasarid Toga Timur, and various Persian warlords all fighting for control. The Georgians saw their opportunity and pushed the Mongols completely out of their territory. In Anatolia, the Uyghur commander Eretna declared independence in 1336, establishing the Eretnid state. The Armenian kingdom of Cilicia, which had remained loyal to their Mongol masters for decades, suddenly found themselves alone and vulnerable. The Mamluks escalated their attacks. In 1375, the Armenians were overrun and destroyed. The Ilkhanate had completely disintegrated, but the chaos wasn't limited to Persia. Mongol rulers in China and the Chagatai Khanate faced their own crises. Then something far worse arrived: the plague. The Black Death started in the Mongol dominions and spread like wildfire across the empire. It devastated all the Khanates, cutting off the commercial ties that had sustained the Pax Mongolica. Millions died. The disease reached Europe and killed an estimated 50 million people in the 14th century alone. Trade routes that had connected east and west fell silent. Cities were emptied. The empire that had been built on movement and conquest was paralyzed by an invisible enemy. As Mongol power declined, non-Mongol leaders seized control throughout the former empire. Between 1342 and 1369, the Golden Horde lost all its western territories, including modern Belarus and Ukraine, to Poland and Lithuania. In the Chagatai Khanate, Muslim and non-Muslim princes warred with each other from 1331 to 1343. The Khanate disintegrated when non-Genghisid warlords set up their own puppet khans in Transoxiana and Mogulistan. Janibeg Khan briefly reasserted Jochid dominance over the Chagatides between 1342 and 1357. He demanded submission from an Ilkhanate offshoot in Azerbaijan, boasting that, "Today, 3 Ulusis are under my control." For a moment, it seemed like the Golden Horde might restore unity. But in 1359, Janibeg's successor Berdebek Khan was assassinated. Rival families within the Jochid line immediately began fighting for the throne. The period known as the Great Troubles lasted from 1359 to 1381, tearing the Golden Horde apart from within. In China, the last UN ruler Togan Timur was powerless to stop the collapse. His court had printed unbacked currency that entered a hyperinflationary spiral. The Han Chinese people, crushed under harsh Mongol impositions, revolted across the country. In the 1350s, Gongmin of Goryeo pushed Mongol garrisons out of Korea and massacred the family of Togan Timur Khan's empress. In Tibet, Taisitu Changchub Gyaltsen eliminated Mongol influence entirely. The Mongols were increasingly isolated from their subjects. They had become foreign occupiers in lands they once dominated. In 1368, Ming rebel forces captured the capital. The Yuan dynasty fled north to their ancestral homeland in Mongolia. The conquest that had taken 3 generations to complete was lost in a single generation. After the overthrow of the Yuan, the Golden Horde lost all contact with Mongolia and China. The vast communication network that had connected the empire crumbled. The Chagatai Khanate faced its own executioner. Timur, known as Tamerlane, conquered both main parts of the Khanate between 1336 and 1405. He founded the Timurid Empire on the ruins of Mongol power, but remnants survived. The Yarkant Khanate, the last Chagatai state, held out until 1680, when the Oirat Dzungar Khanate finally defeated it. The Golden Horde broke into smaller Turkic hordes that declined steadily over 4 centuries. The Great Horde, a shadow of its former self, survived until 1502, when the Crimean Khanate sacked its capital at Sarai. The Crimean Khanate lasted until 1783. Other successor states like the Khanate of Bukhara and the Kazakh Khanate persisted even longer, ruling into the 18th and 19th centuries. But these were echoes, not the empire itself. The Mongol Empire that had stretched from the Pacific to the Mediterranean, that had connected east and west, that had redrawn the map of the world, was gone. What began with Genghis Khan's coronation in 1206 had ended in fragmentation, plague, and defeat by 1368. 162 years, 6 generations, from unified nomadic tribes to the largest contiguous land empire in history, and finally to scattered remnants clinging to the memory of past glory. The empire had fallen, but its impact would shape the world for centuries to come. The trade routes it established, the technologies it spread, the mixing of cultures it forced, the political boundaries it created. Modern Russia, China, Iran, and Central Asia all bear the marks of Mongol conquest. The world had been fundamentally transformed, and nothing would ever be the same. The military machine that conquered half the world was built on simplicity and speed. In 1206, when Genghis Khan unified the tribes, he commanded at least 105,000 warriors. Scholars debate the exact numbers, but what matters is how those forces were organized. The system was brutally efficient, based on units of 10. 10 men formed an arban. 10 arbans created a zun of 100 warriors. 10 zuns made a mingan of 1,000. 10 mingans formed a tumen of 10,000 soldiers. Every warrior knew his place. Every commander knew exactly how many men he controlled. The Mongols became legendary for their horse archers, warriors who could fire arrows with deadly accuracy while riding at full gallop. But they were more than mounted bowmen. Troops armed with lances were equally skilled in close combat, and the Mongols learned quickly to recruit specialists from conquered territories. Chinese engineers joined their ranks. Bombardier Corps became expert at building trebuchets, catapults, and siege machinery. Cities that thought their walls would protect them discovered Mongol armies could construct siege equipment on the spot, using local resources. Speed was everything. Mongol soldiers wore lighter armor than most armies they faced, sacrificing protection for mobility. Each warrior traveled with multiple horses, switching to fresh mounts as needed. They could cover distances that seemed impossible to their enemies. And unlike conventional armies that depended on slow-moving supply trains, Mongol soldiers operated independently of supply lines. They lived off the land, moved like lightning, and struck before their enemies could react. Communication was maintained through an elaborate courier system. Leaders of armies separated by thousands of miles could coordinate attacks with precision that stunned their opponents. Discipline was forged through the nurj, the traditional Mongol hunt. These weren't ordinary hunting expeditions. They were military exercises disguised as sport. Mongol forces would spread out in a massive line stretching for miles. They would surround an entire region, then slowly drive all the game within that area toward the center. The goal was simple: let nothing escape, slaughter everything. The hunts trained warriors to maintain formation over vast distances, to follow orders without question, and to work as a coordinated unit. The Mongols possessed another devastating advantage: their ability to traverse terrain that stopped other armies completely. Frozen rivers became highways leading directly to cities on their banks. During unusually cold winters, the Mongols moved faster, not slower. In April 1241, at the Battle of Mohi, Mongol cavalry crossed the flooded Sajo River in spring conditions. 30,000 mounted warriors crossed in a single night and defeated the Hungarian king Bela IV before he could react. Against the Khwarezm Shah, they used a flotilla of barges to prevent enemy forces from escaping across rivers. Yet for all their skills on horseback, the Mongols rarely relied on naval power. They were creatures of the steppe, not the sea. In the 1260s and 1270s, they used ships while conquering the Song dynasty in China, but their attempted seaborne invasions of Japan ended in disaster. Around the eastern Mediterranean, their campaigns remained almost exclusively land-based, while Crusader and Mamluk forces controlled the waters. Every campaign began with meticulous planning. Reconnaissance units gathered intelligence about enemy territories. Spies infiltrated cities and reported troop movements, defensive capabilities, and political divisions. The Mongols never attacked blind. By the time their armies appeared on the horizon, they already knew everything about their target. This organization and preparation allowed Mongol forces to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously. While one army conquered Persia, another invaded China, and a third pushed into Europe. Coordination across thousands of miles was their greatest weapon. All adult males up to age 60 were eligible for conscription. Military service wasn't just an obligation, it was an honor rooted in their tribal warrior tradition. Boys grew up training to join the army. Old men fought until they could no longer ride. The entire society was organized around conquest. This was the machine that built the largest land empire in history, not through superior numbers, but through superior tactics, organization, and an absolute commitment to victory at any cost. Genghis Khan ruled an empire where every faith had followers. Buddhists prayed alongside Christians, Muslims traded with shamans, Manichaeans lived near Taoists. This should have torn the empire apart. But Genghis made a promise that changed everything. He declared complete religious freedom across all Mongol lands. Every priest, every monk, every holy man would pay no taxes. They owed no military service, no forced labor. For the first time in history, an empire this massive protected all religions equally. Genghis himself practiced shamanism, speaking to spirits and reading the sky for signs, but he refused to force his beliefs on anyone. The Mongols lived as nomads, moving with the seasons, sleeping in felt tents that could be packed in hours. They had no temples, no mosques, no churches. Their places of worship were the open plains and the eternal blue sky. But then something changed. When Ögedei became Khan in 1241, he built a capital that would shock the world. He didn't just construct palaces of gold and jade. He built 4 different houses of worship in the same city. A Buddhist temple rose next to a Muslim mosque. A Christian church stood beside a Taoist shrine. His own wife was a Nestorian Christian, praying to Jesus while he honored the old spirits. For decades, this impossible balance held. Different gods, different prayers, one empire. But what happened next would fracture everything Genghis built. the empire split into 4 khanates, each drifting toward its own people. The Yuan dynasty in China embraced Buddhism and shamanism, filling their courts with monks in saffron robes. The 3 Western khanates made a different choice. They converted to Islam, and the call to prayer echoed where shamans once chanted. The promise of religious freedom had created the world's most diverse empire, but that same diversity would eventually pull it apart. The religious divide wasn't the only thing that defined the Mongol legacy. They left behind something even more powerful: their words. Sometime after Genghis Khan died in 1227, scribes gathered in secret. They had been given an impossible task: write down everything about the great Khan. His childhood, his rise, his conquests, his bloodline. But they couldn't just write history. They had to write the truth, even the parts that made Genghis look weak or brutal. The result was called The Secret History of the Mongols, written in their native tongue, hidden from foreign eyes. It told stories no other empire dared to record. How Genghis was born clutching a blood clot in his fist. How he killed his own brother over a stolen bird. How he survived betrayal, slavery, and starvation before becoming the most feared man on earth. This wasn't propaganda. It was raw, unfiltered memory, preserved for the royal family alone. But the Mongols didn't stop there. In the early 1300s, a new Khan rose in Persia. His name was Ghazan, and he wanted something no ruler had ever attempted. He commissioned a book called the Jami al-Tawarik, the Universal History. Not just Mongol history, not just Asian history, the entire world's history, from Adam and Eve to the Mongol conquest. Every civilization, every king, every war. It was the first true attempt at world history, written by a people who had conquered half of it. Then something unexpected emerged from the workshops. Mongol scribes in the 14th century were making mistakes while copying these precious texts. So they invented something, a mixture of resin and vegetable pigments that could cover errors. They had created correction fluid centuries before anyone else. Nobody expected the world's fiercest warriors to be perfectionists with a brush. The Mongols valued art, but their taste was specific. They didn't commission grand portraits of themselves like European kings. They painted horses, sleek, powerful war horses, frozen mid-gallop, muscles taut, manes flowing. To them, a perfect horse was worth more than a perfect man. But these cultural achievements, the histories, the art, the innovations, would soon face their greatest test. Because while the Mongols were writing their legacy, new threats were gathering at their borders. While the empire fractured along religious lines, the Khans became obsessed with something else entirely: the secrets of the universe. Roger Bacon, a scholar in faraway England, studied the Mongol conquests and reached a stunning conclusion. The Mongols didn't win because of their horses or their bows. They won because of mathematics, numbers, calculations, precise measurements that let them move armies like clockwork across continents. Ögedei Khan proved Bacon right. In 1233, he discovered that the massive armillary sphere in conquered Zhongdu was broken. This intricate bronze device that mapped the stars and predicted eclipses. He ordered it repaired immediately. 3 years later, it broke again. He fixed it again. Then in 1234, he demanded something even more ambitious, a complete revision of the Chinese calendar. He built a Confucian temple in Karakoram, where his advisor Yelu Chukai worked day and night, calculating moon phases and solar patterns, creating a calendar that would govern an empire stretching from Korea to Hungary. But Ögedei's grandson Mungke took it further. Rashid al-Din, the Persian historian, recorded something extraordinary. Mongol Khan was solving complex Euclidean geometry problems for fun. Alone in his tent, the world's most powerful warlord was drawing circles and angles, proving theorems that stumped scholars. He wrote to his brother Hulagu with an urgent request: "Send me Nasir al-Din Tusi, the greatest astronomer alive." Mongol wanted Tusi to build him an observatory in Karakoram that would surpass anything in Baghdad or Damascus. But then Mongol died on campaign in southern China, his dream unrealized. Hulagu Khan inherited his brother's vision. In 1259, he gave Tusi an enormous grant and a simple order: build the greatest observatory the world has ever seen. Build it in Marageh, Persia, and prepare complete astronomical tables for me in 12 years. Tusi protested, "I need 30 years for this work." Hulagu's response was final: "You have 12. What happened next shocked the scientific world. Tusi delivered the Ilkhanic tables in exactly 12 years, mathematical predictions of planetary movements so accurate they wouldn't be surpassed for centuries. He revised Euclid's elements, correcting errors that had persisted for over 1,000 years. He invented the Tusi couple, a revolutionary mathematical device that explained how planets could move in circles within circles. And his observatory? It held 400,000 bonbons salvaged from the burning ruins of Baghdad and other conquered cities. Chinese astronomers worked alongside Persian scholars, sharing secrets their civilizations had kept separate for millennia. Kublai Khan built on this foundation. He constructed multiple observatories across China, filling their libraries with texts like the Wu Hu Li Ti, Euclid's works brought by Muslim mathematicians. His court became home to brilliant minds like Zhu Shijie and Guo Shoujing, who pushed mathematics into territories no one had explored. Even his physicians were innovators. Hu Sihui wrote a medical treatise in 1330 describing the importance of diet, connecting food to health in ways that seemed almost modern. But perhaps the most remarkable Khan was Ghazan. He spoke 4 languages, including Latin. In 1295, he built the Tabriz Observatory, and it became a bridge between worlds. A Byzantine Greek astronomer named Gregory Chioniades traveled there to study under scholars who had worked with Tusi himself. Chioniades learned secrets that would change Europe forever. He brought back the universal astrolabe, a device that could measure stars from any latitude on Earth. He translated the Tusi couple into Greek, and this mathematical innovation would later influence Copernicus when he proposed that Earth revolved around the sun, not the other way around. Chioniades moved freely between Constantinople, Trebizond, and Tabriz because of a surprising alliance. Byzantium and the Mongols had become partners, and the Empire of Trebizond was actually a Mongol vassal state. The scientific network spread even further. In Gansu province, a Mongol prince named Radna patronized an astronomer from Samarkand named Al-Sanjufini. In 1363, Al-Sanjufini completed an Arabic astronomical handbook dedicated to Radna, a direct descendant of Kublai Khan. The margins of this handbook contained something unprecedented: glosses written in Middle Mongolian, showing that even in their own language, the Mongols were preserving cutting-edge science. These weren't just observatories. They were weapons of knowledge, as powerful as any cavalry charge. But knowledge alone couldn't hold an empire together, and soon the Mongols would discover that mathematics and astronomy couldn't solve their greatest problem, themselves. The Mongols discovered something revolutionary. Information could move faster than armies, and that changed everything. They called it the yam, a mail system so efficient it wouldn't be matched for 6 centuries. Across the entire empire, from Korea to Hungary, they built relay stations called ortör. These weren't simple outposts. They were lavishly furnished stations with fresh horses, food stores, and armed guards. Every 40 kilometers, another station waited. Here's how it worked. A messenger would ride at full gallop to the next station, covering 25 miles of rough terrain. He'd either grab a fresh horse and continue, or hand the message to the next rider who was already mounted and ready. No delays, no rest. The message kept moving. Mongol riders covered 200 kilometers every single day. To put that in perspective, the famous Pony Express, celebrated as one of history's great achievements, wouldn't match that speed for another 600 years. Each relay station had entire households assigned to maintain it. If you carried a paisa, a special passport tablet given by the Khan, you could stop at any station for food and fresh horses. Military messengers didn't even need the paisa. They showed their credentials and rode. Merchants from China rode alongside Persian traders and European diplomats, all using the same system, all protected by Mongol law. Then came the ultimate test. The great Khan died in Karakoram, deep in the Mongolian heartland. Batu Khan was commanding armies in Central Europe, thousands of miles away across mountains, deserts, and steppes. The news reached him in 4 to 6 weeks. An empire that stretched across half the known world could communicate faster than most kingdoms could send messages across a single country. But the yam was only part of it. Genghis Khan and his son Ogedei were building something even more ambitious. Roads. Not dirt paths, but engineered highways carved through impossible terrain. One road cut straight through the Altai Mountains, where previous empires had declared passage impossible. After Ogedei became Khan, he ordered the Chagatai Khanate and the Golden Horde to connect their road systems, linking the western and eastern halves of the empire with a single continuous route. Kublai Khan took it to another level entirely. When he founded the Yuan dynasty in China, he built 2 parallel relay systems, one for high officials with luxury hostels, another for ordinary messengers. The numbers were staggering: 1,100 postal stations, 50,000 horses, 8,400 oxen, 6,700 mules, 4,000 carts, 6,000 boats. It was the largest communication network ever built. In Manchuria and southern Siberia, where deep snow made horses useless, the Mongols adapted. They used dog sleds for the yam, teams of huskies pulling messages across frozen wastelands where no horse could survive. But maintaining this system was crushing the empire's finances. In Persia, Ghazan Khan found the relay system collapsing from corruption and overuse. He rebuilt it on a smaller scale, constructing new hostels but issuing a harsh decree: only imperial envoys could receive support. Everyone else would have to pay. The Jochids of the Golden Horde went further. They created a special yam tax, forcing their subjects to fund the relay system whether they used it or not. The yam had connected an empire. It had made the impossible possible: instant communication across continents. But it was also bleeding the Khanates dry. In 1305, a letter traveled from the Ilkhan Mongol Öljaitu all the way to King Philip IV of France, proof that the system still worked across vast distances. Yet the cost of maintaining this marvel was becoming unbearable. The relay stations needed constant supplies. The horses needed feed. The guards needed payment. And the empire's enemies were learning something dangerous. If you wanted to paralyze the Mongols, you didn't attack their armies. You attacked their roads. The roads carried more than messages. They carried wealth beyond imagination. When Genghis Khan unified the Mongol tribes in 1206, he didn't just create an empire. He created the world's largest free trade zone. For the first time in history, a merchant could travel from the Mediterranean Sea to the Pacific Ocean under the protection of a single power. The Silk Road, which had existed in fragments for centuries, suddenly became safe. Genghis understood something other conquerors missed. Merchants were weapons. They brought him information about enemy kingdoms. They served as his diplomats and spies, and they supplied goods the Mongols couldn't produce themselves: silk, spices, weapons, medicines. He welcomed foreign traders even before he became Khan, protecting them when other warlords robbed them. But the Mongols did something revolutionary with commerce. They invented the ortok system, a merchant partnership where Mongol elites provided capital and merchants did the traveling and trading. It worked like the Islamic Chirad or the Italian Commenda, but with a crucial difference. Mongol investors didn't just use coined money. They invested uncoined precious metals and tradable goods, financing money lending and trade on a massive scale. Mongol princes formed partnerships with Italian merchants, including the family of a young Venetian named Marco Polo. Any merchant with proper documentation could travel freely across the empire. They received protection, food, shelter, and the right to use the yam relay stations. Roads stretched from the Mediterranean basin all the way to China, better maintained than some European highways. Goods that once took years to move now flowed in months. Marco Polo journeyed east from Venice to the court of Kublai Khan, spending 17 years in China. A Chinese Mongol monk named Rabban Bar Salma made the opposite journey, traveling from Beijing all the way to France and meeting European kings. European missionaries like William of Rubruck traveled to Mongolia trying to convert the Khans to Christianity. Papal envoys arrived hoping to forge a Franco-Mongol alliance against Islam, but here's what most people missed. Almost no one traveled the full length of the Silk Road. Instead, goods moved like a relay race. A Chinese merchant sold silk to a Central Asian trader in Samarkand. That trader sold it to a Persian in Baghdad. The Persian sold it to a Syrian in Damascus. The Syrian sold it to an Italian in Constantinople. The Italian finally sold it in Venice or Genoa for a price 50 times what the original Chinese merchant received. Everyone in the chain took their cut. The system made fortunes. After Genghis died, his successors Ugade and Guyuk expanded merchant privileges even further. Traders brought clothing, food, and luxury goods directly to the imperial palaces. In return, the great Khans gave them tax exemptions and unlimited access to relay stations. Merchants even became tax farmers. They collected taxes in China, Russia, and Iran, keeping a percentage for themselves. If bandits attacked a merchant caravan, the Mongols had a brutal solution. Local residents were forced to recover the stolen goods or pay the full value themselves. Villages learned quickly: protect the merchants or face ruin. But then Mongol Khan discovered a crisis: money laundering, tax evasion, corrupt partnerships draining the imperial treasury. Some merchants were reporting false losses and pocketing insurance payments. Others were bribing officials to avoid taxes entirely. Mongol cracked down hard. He sent imperial investigators to audit every ortok business. He decreed that all merchants must pay commercial and property taxes, no exceptions, and he personally paid off all debts that high-ranking Mongol elites owed to merchants, resetting the system. The Yuan dynasty continued these reforms. For over a century, the Pax Mongolica held peace, prosperity, exchange of ideas, technologies, and wealth on a scale never seen before. Gold dinars were struck at Ghazni in 1221 with Genghis Khan's name, showing how quickly conquered territories integrated into the trade network. But empires don't last forever. In the 14th century, everything collapsed. The Mongol Empire fractured into warring khanates. The political unity shattered. The cultural exchange stopped. The economic system fell apart. Turkic tribes seized control of the Western Silk Road from the crumbling Byzantine Empire. They would eventually form the Ottoman Empire under Sunni Islam, cutting off direct European access to Asian trade. In the east, the Han Chinese rose in rebellion and overthrew the Yuan dynasty in 1368. They established the Ming dynasty and made a fateful choice: economic isolationism. The new Chinese emperors closed their borders, burned ocean-going ships, and turned inward. The Silk Road, which had flourished under Mongol protection for 150 years, withered and died. The roads fell into disrepair. The relay stations were abandoned. Bandits returned. And the world became fragmented again, divided by language, religion, and hostile borders. The greatest trade network in human history vanished almost overnight. Europeans would spend the next century desperately searching for new routes to Asia, eventually sailing around Africa and stumbling upon the Americas, all because the Mongol roads had closed. The empire fell, but its shadow never left. At its peak, the Mongol Empire was the largest contiguous land empire in history, one unbroken territory stretching from Korea to Hungary. When it collapsed, the fragments didn't simply vanish. Eastern and Western Russia, once separate principalities, remained unified. Western China, conquered by Mongol horsemen, stayed connected to the eastern provinces. The Mongols had redrawn the map of the world, and even their absence couldn't erase those lines. The conquerors themselves disappeared into the populations they once ruled. Mongol warriors married local women. Their children spoke local languages. Within generations, descendants of Genghis Khan were praying in Buddhist temples in China and kneeling in mosques in Persia. The Eastern Khanate embraced Buddhism. The three Western Khanates converted to Islam, particularly the mystical Sufi traditions. The empire of the sword became an empire of faith, but they left gifts behind. The Mongols gave their conquered peoples a writing system, an alphabet based on Old Uyghur characters. Mongolia still uses it today, a direct link to Genghis Khan, written on every street sign and school book. Then something unexpected happened in Russia. Moscow was a minor city, barely worth noticing when the Mongols first conquered it. But the Mongol Tatar yoke, the centuries of tribute and submission, accidentally created a superpower. The Mongols made Russian princes into tax collectors. "Go take money from your own people," they said, "and bring us our share." This meant the Mongols rarely visited Russian lands themselves. They stayed in their distant capitals while Russians did the dirty work. The Russians learned. They collected taxes and kept armies. They grew rich and powerful in the shadow of their masters. In 1382, Toktamish and the Golden Horde laid siege to Moscow. But the city had grown strong. Eventually, a Russian ruler named Ivan III decided he'd paid enough tribute. He gathered his forces and waited for the Mongols at the Ugra River in 1480. The two armies stared at each other across the water. Neither attacked. Days passed, weeks. Then the Mongols withdrew. It was called the Great Stand on the Ugra River, and it proved something revolutionary. The Mongols were vulnerable. Ivan III declared independence and formed the Russian Tsardom. The conquered had become the conqueror. But the Mongol legacy reached further than battlefields. Europe's entire understanding of the world had been transformed. Before the Mongol Empire, Europeans thought the world ended just past Jerusalem. Mongol merchants, ambassadors, and travelers brought back tales of China, India, Persia, and lands Europeans didn't know existed. Maps were redrawn, trade routes were imagined. When Christopher Columbus set sail in 1492, he wasn't searching for a new world. He was trying to reach Cathay, China, the land of the Grand Khan that Marco Polo had described 2 centuries earlier. But the Mongols left one final, devastating gift: the Black Death. In 1347, a Mongol army under Janibeg besieged Kaffa, a Genoese trading post on the Crimean Peninsula. It should have been a routine siege: surround the city, starve them out, accept surrender. But something went wrong. The Mongol warriors started dying, not from battle wounds, from disease, swellings in their groins and armpits, black spots on their skin, fevers that killed in days. Janibeg made a calculated decision. If his army was dying, so would the enemy. He ordered his men to load infected corpses into catapults and launch them over Kaffa's walls. The first biological warfare in recorded history. The dead bodies landed in the city streets, spreading plague through the trapped population. The Genoese merchants panicked. They abandoned Kaffa, climbing aboard their ships and fleeing to southern Europe. But they brought passengers, infected rats, infected fleas, infected people. The plague reached Italian ports in 1347 and exploded across Europe. Within 3 years, it killed between 75 and 200 million people worldwide. Up to 50 million died in Europe alone, 1/3 of the entire population. The Mongol trade routes, which had brought silk and spices and knowledge, had also carried death. The roads that connected the world had become highways for the apocalypse. Entire villages vanished. Cities became graveyards. The survivors would spend generations rebuilding what the plague destroyed. The Mongol Empire had unified the world, and then, in its collapse, nearly ended it. Today, Mongolia is a landlocked nation between Russia and China. The descendants of Genghis Khan herd sheep and live in cities. But look at a map. The borders they drew still exist. The religions they spread still dominate. The trade networks they built still shape global commerce. And in quiet moments, when historians study the rise and fall of empires, they always return to the same question: could anyone ever build something that vast again? Or were the Mongols the only ones who could hold the entire world in their hands? But there was another legacy, darker than plague and longer than empire, destruction on a scale the world had never seen. Genghis Khan and his descendants killed approximately 11% of the entire world's population. 11%. Researchers estimate between 30 and 80 million dead. The uncertainty itself reveals the magnitude of the slaughter. So many died that forests reclaimed farmland across Asia. Carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere measurably dropped. The Mongol conquest actually improved the environment's health because there weren't enough humans left to cut down trees or farm the land. The genetic evidence is undeniable. A 2003 study found that 8% of men in Mongolia and 1 in 200 men worldwide are direct descendants of Genghis Khan. His bloodline spread through conquest, through rape, through the systematic claiming of women in every city that fell. Today, roughly 16 million men carry his genes. China suffered most. Before the Mongol invasion, The Chinese dynasties counted approximately 120 million people. When the conquest finished in 1279 and the census was taken in 1300, only 60 million remained, half the population gone. Scholars still debate what happened. Frederick Mote argues it was administrative failure. The Mongols simply didn't keep good records, and millions of Chinese were living but uncounted. Timothy Brooke offers a darker explanation. The Mongols reduced much of the southern Chinese population, especially Han Chinese, to an invisible underclass. They cancelled passports. They denied the right to own land directly. Chinese families had to depend on Mongol and Tartar overlords for survival, which often meant sons were recruited into Mongol armies to fight against their own people. Historians like William McNeill and David Morgan point to the bubonic plague as the real killer, not Mongol swords. But the sword killed plenty. When the Mongols invaded Poland in 1260, they slaughtered Dominican martyrs and left their bodies displayed as warnings. Terror wasn't a side effect of Mongol warfare. It was the strategy. David Nicole wrote in The Mongol Warlords, "Terror and mass extermination of anyone opposing them was a well-tested Mongol tactic." Iran suffered even worse than China. The Iranian plateau, once one of the most prosperous regions on Earth, was devastated by widespread disease and famine after the Mongol invasions. 3/4 of the population died, possibly 10 to 15 million people. Historian Stephen Ward calculated that Iran's population didn't recover to pre-Mongol levels until the mid-20th century. 7 centuries to replace what the Mongols destroyed in decades. Russia lost approximately half its population during the invasion. Historian Colin McEvedy estimates a more conservative drop, from 7.5 million people before the Mongols to 7 million after. But even that modest estimate means 500,000 dead in a medieval population. Hungary faced annihilation. The kingdom had roughly 2 million people when the Mongols arrived. Historians estimate up to half died in the invasion. Rogerius, a Hungarian cleric who witnessed the slaughter, wrote that the Mongols killed everybody regardless of gender or age. He recorded something even more disturbing. The Mongols especially found pleasure in humiliating women. Systematic rape was a weapon of conquest. This wasn't collateral damage. This was policy. When a city resisted, the Mongols would sometimes spare it if it surrendered. But if a city fought back and was conquered, the standard procedure was total extermination. Every man, woman, and child killed. Buildings burned, irrigation systems destroyed, farmland salted. The message was clear. Submit immediately, or your entire civilization will be erased. Some cities learned. Others chose defiance and vanished from history. The Mongol Empire built roads and spread knowledge and created the largest free trade zone in human history. But it was built on mountains of skulls. The same empire that connected East and West also depopulated entire regions so thoroughly that it took centuries for human civilization to recover. Genghis Khan didn't just conquer the world, he nearly emptied it.